Hey guys, Angli Et Nex here again. Today I'm going to bring you my PVE Hellbringer Scourge Warlock build. This build is primarily feeded into the Fury spec and it is full DPS. In this video you will see powers, feats, boons, and at the very end I will go over rotations for the different types of gameplay, whether it's dailies, dungeons, or the boss fights for dungeons. So let's get into the build and I hope you enjoy it. As you can see, I am a Hellbringer, I am a human, and I am just barely over 2500 gear score. Even though I'm a lower gear score, this build still works, still puts out great damage numbers. I am basically running the economy version of this build as I haven't spent any astral diamonds in this build to make it what it is. I'm running 4 free artifacts as the lantern is free, the Cleric Sigil is free, and the Warlock Sigil is free, and I got the Lost Mouth Horn from a drop, so it didn't cost me any Astral Diamonds to make. But the Twisted set is what helps me with my damage here. When you attack an enemy, you gain a stack of power. When you're hit by an enemy, you gain a stack of defense. And on top of that, I'm running a Greater Dread enchantment, which adds 60% critical severity to my encounter powers. So 60% more damage when I crit. My active artifact is the Lantern of Revelation. I'm running the Lost Mouth Horn with the 3-piece Lost Mouth set. So I have the belt and I have the neck piece to complete the Lost Mouth set. I am also running the Sigil of the Scourge. And I am running the Sigil of the Devoted. Now, you could swap out the Sigil of the Devoted for a Shard of Orcus if you go late game and change to the Baphomet set, and then you could also change the Sigil of the Scourge for either a Thane Book of the Dead or a Sigil of the Controller. Thane Book of the Dead gives you critical armor pen, and the Sigil of the Controller gives you power and crit. And then my rings here are just free rings that I got from buying the Dragonborn pack, as all my +4 rings are on my bonding companion. And jumping into stats here, even with, like I said before, the low gear score, my stats are pretty good. Crit is a little bit low, and that's even supplemented by having a Rage Drake mount. But Warlocks are mainly power nowadays, so the main stats that you're going to go for are Con for the damage bonus and Charisma for critical chance. If you're not a human, you will go +2 in Con and +2 in Charisma, but since I am a human, I was only able to put a +2 in 1, so I put it in Charisma. And also took a higher roll on intelligence for increased resistance ignored and recharge speed. It hasn't hurt me very much, but barring any race rerolls, I will probably just stick with what I have set up here. Going into powers here, I will show you a few different options for encounter powers that you can use to switch out for daily runs, dungeon runs, and boss fights. So to start off, Killing Flames, this is your hardest hitting encounter power. When enemies are at 25% health or less, you have an increased chance to just kill them outright with this ability. And if you kill them outright, you gain action points and gain a soul puppet to fight for you. This will almost never leave your toolbar unless you are running dailies. Then you can switch up to something that does more AoE damage. Dark Spiral Aura is a good secondary at will, and it deals pretty good damage once you have your third aura up and you use it, but I'm currently not running this. Broods of Hadar is your main single point daily. This is going to be your secondary daily, but main single point daily, as it does damage to a single target alone. Deals good damage even only at 3 points, but it will eventually get outshined by using Tyrannical Curse. Shadow Walk, you can use this if you are running dungeons and you are getting beat to the punch by, say, a great weapon fighter that is sprinting past you. This will give you a movement speed increase and help you get to the mobs first and deal your damage quicker than everybody else. Vampiric Embrace, you can use this when running your dailies. So in Icewind Dale, if you're getting hit pretty hard by those ice giants, you can use Vampiric Embrace to lifesteal and essentially supplement your sustainability with this build. I would slot it in Killing Flames and leave Fiery Bolt on. Just building down Dread Theft. I have points in Dread Theft, but I am not currently using it. It is still a hard-hitting ability, but it doesn't synergize well with the build and the way that it works. Deadly Curse, same thing. It deals good damage, but it is definitely less damage than what we can get from the other two personals that we're using. Hand of Blight, this is on my left trigger, so it is my secondary at will. In melee stance, you can debuff your enemies with every third hit, which is nice, but I haven't seen a whole lot of Scourge Warlocks switching back and forth like Great Weapon Fighters or Guardian Fighters or Paladins do, switching back and forth between their at-wills. Fiery Bolt, this is going to be a main staple, and it'll only be swapped out really in boss fights just to deal more single point damage, but this does good AoE damage and it has a relatively low cooldown. Warding Curse, just put points here to build down even more. Pillar of Power, this is the main way that we boost our damage. You essentially drop a green puddle on the ground, and while you stand in it, your damage and damage resistance is increased, and if enemies walk into it, they take damage and have their damage and damage resistance reduced. Flames of Empowerment, at 4 points in Flames of Empowerment, every time you use your at-wills, you gain a stack of 5% damage, and it stacks up to 3 times. So that's 15% damage basically all the time because we're using our at-wills as much as we do. Hellish Rebuke is our main at-will. It offers a DOT effect, a damage over time effect, that essentially burns enemies over time. And because we are feeded into this, this adds extra damage to our build. Hellish Rebuke is a hardest hitting at-will that we have and should be main slot in this build. You could also use it in conjunction with Hand of Blight with the debuff, but like I said before, not a whole lot of people switch back and forth. Tyrannical Curse, this is our main daily that we use. You mark your target and mark up to 3 targets, and then the damage that you deal to them is increased and then spread out to enemies surrounding those targets. So the more targets that you can mark, if you can get all 3 marked targets and deal damage to them, you're actually going to do a massive burst of AoE damage, and that could potentially take up the whole room. Warlock's Bargain, this is basically only used just for boss fights primarily, because it's almost like a Guardian Fighter's Knights challenge where it kind of locks you into combat with your target, so you gain increased lifesteal, increased damage, and any damage that the target deals to you is reflected back to them, and it also amplifies damage. So marking your target with Warlock's Bargain and then hitting them with Killing Flames greatly increases the damage of Killing Flames. Makes it pretty nice just for single point boss fights like Orcus, Sindrith, pretty much any of the dungeons that you run. You come to a single point boss at some point, so you can switch to this. Blade of the Vanquished Armies. This is not generally used in dungeons or in-game play other than running through your dailies, going through Sharandarge, Red Ring, things like that. You can apply this and kind of just walk through. Gates of Hell, we are halfway feated into this, but we are not using it. The feat that we use increases the damage by 25% and AP generation, but the damage is just too slow on this. The damage potential is high, but it just takes so long to get there, and it's kind of one of those point and shoot abilities, so it makes it harder to use. Hadar's Grasp. This is used in both PvP and PvE, but primarily in PvP, whereas you lift your target off the ground, and then the target takes 50% more damage while it is being lifted off the ground. So it's really good for PvP. Arms of Hadar, you could swap this out, swap it out with Killing Flames for running your dailies. If you're having trouble with AoE burst, you need a little bit more AoE damage to kill the things that you're doing quicker. That would be the only instance that I think you would put it on there. And it knocks the enemies prone, so that's always nice. All-consuming curse, your critical strikes have a chance to apply lesser curse to your targets, so this just helps us when we're in battle that we don't have to be spamming that right bumper all the time, so it's pretty useful. Jumping into the feats here, we're going 0 of 3 in this first one just because as a mainly ranged DPS we don't need the HP that it offers, as we're not really mixing it up in the middle there. The next one, 3 of 3 for extra critical chance, 3% critical chance. Next one is 4 of 5 for increased AP generation when attacking cursed targets. Your encounter powers deal 6% more damage. And this next one is huge. Your encounter powers have 10% reduced cooldown. That is huge for us. And then as a human, I gain 3 more feat points than any other class. So if you're not a human, you'll put 2 of 5 in this one. But since I am a human, I just went ahead and put 5 of 5 to get the extra damage bonus from Khan. And then this last one is 15% increased crit severity. The first one is your critical strikes deal 50% weapon damage as necrotic over time, just a little bit extra DPS for us. And next one is Gates of Hell deal 25% more damage and 50% more AP, but we're not using Gates of Hell, we're using it for that secondary part where Hellish Rebuke deals 25% more damage. The DOT of Hellish Rebuke does 25% more damage. Hell touched, foes that hit you become hell touched, and when they are hell touched you deal 10% more damage to them. Executioner's Gift, your attacks, your at-wills, your encounters deal 15% more damage as their life reduces. So as soon as they go below 100% life, you're dealing 15% more damage. And this next one is your Killing Flames does a 30% damage AoE burst around the target. So it'll deal 30% of its damage to foes around the target. But if there are no foes around the target, then the target takes 100% of the damage. Creeping Death. Cursed targets take 60% more damage from you, and it does stack. So think about 60% more damage stacking multiple times on targets because you're cursing everything. That's a pretty substantial damage boost, and where most of our damage comes from right there. And coupled with Pillar of Power, it just makes it that much harder to hit. And then Hope Stealer, crits cause increase in lifesteal by 5%. That's pretty big because a couple of our feats proc off lifesteal. Hellish Rebuke does a 5% damage debuff to enemies that it hits. So you're dealing more damage with Hellish Rebuke, and you're also debuffing with Hellish Rebuke. And then last but not least, Dark Revelry. Lifestealing, you gain a movement and power buff by 20%. So it's a buff to you, and it is a buff to your team. So they get 20% of 20% power increase. Going over boons here, as this is a pretty fresh tune, I haven't even started or completed most of these campaigns, but I will still go over them with you just so that you know which boons to take. Starting off with Storm King, you're going to take 2% lifesteal severity with 100% maximum hit points. Next is going to be 400 stamina Gargain and 2% Everfrost resist. Chance when taking damage to deal up to 2000 damage, bonus damage to your attacker. When you kill a foe, you have a chance to deal 2000 fire damage to nearby enemies. And then Chill of the Wind, or Chill of Winter, is like Avalanche and Icewind Dale. You build up stacks, and when you reach the max stacks, you release an orb of damage, so it does 14,000 damage. Sharndar is next, basically going power all the way across the board. So 400 power, 400 crit, 3% AP generation, 20,000 arcane damage, and then Elvish Fury, which you gain stacks of power, which just means more damage. Dread Ring, again, offense across the board, 250 power, 400 lifesteal, 3% resistance ignored, so more armor pen. And then when taking damage, you have a chance to heal yourself for 20,000, and after that subsides, you gain 4,000 defense for 10 seconds. That's a pretty good boost to anybody's defense for any class. Rampaging Madness, building stacks. At max stacks, you get 4,000 power, 4,000 lifesteal, and 4,000 regen. That's a lot of stats from one simple boon. Icewind Dale, we're going to go with 400 combat advantage, 400 stamina guard gain, 2% crit severity. Then this next one is based on the amount of stamina guard gain you're missing. You can have up to 2,000 extra power added to you. So this is just power waiting to be used. On this one, you could use either Avalanche, where you, when attacking a foe, you build up 20 stacks, and then once you hit 20 stacks, you release 15,000 damage to foes around you. Or you could do this one, chance to gain 10% action points when killing a foe. Either one you could use, both are great, just depends on what you need. I'm personally probably going to go for Avalanche. Underdark, we're going to start off with 400 power, 400 crit, and these both have 1600 max hit points on them. Combat advantage damage bonus. More stamina guard gain, 5% more stamina, and then plus 10% damage against demons. Tyranny of Dragons. Power, 400 power, 400 crit, 400 armor pen, 400 lifesteal, and then the last one, you're going to go 3 of 3 to get 8% critical severity. And guild boons are all relative. They just depend on what rank guild hall you're in, but I would go with power for offense, lifesteal for defense, and revive sickness for your utility. Power obviously because we stack power as warlocks, and lifesteal because we have 3 feats that proc off a lifesteal, and the revive sickness because in endgame content like MSVA, SVA, Fangbreaker, people die a lot, so having that revive sickness reduced down to 1 minute is a lot better than having it for 4.5 minutes. Maze Engine, gonna start with 5% lifesteal severity, 400 combat advantage bonus, 3% action point gain, and then when you strike a foe, you have a chance to gain 2,000 crit strike for 6 seconds. That's a pretty good boost to your critical strike. And finally, Elemental Evil, 300 power, 200 max hit points, 4% lifesteal, 2000 max hit points, 400 critical strike, 2000 hit points. And that last boon in Elemental Evil was, when hitting a foe, a chance to heal yourself for 24,000, and once that subsides, you gain 1,000 critical strike for 10 seconds. And there's another thing that I forgot, which is companions. I'm running a Fire Archon as my bonding companion. I'm running a Skeletal Dog to add 300 lifesteal. I'm running an Air Archon, an Earnest of Belial for critical severity, and then I'm currently running an Earth Archon, but you could swap that out for an Owlbear or a Campion Magus if you are so lucky as to get one of those. So now what I'm going to show you guys is the basic rotation for running dailies or running the main phase of your dungeons, so before you get to your main boss fight. So I'm going to be using Pillar of Power, Fiery Bolt, and Killing Flames. So generally what I do is Shadow Slip in, Pillar of Power, do a couple rebukes just to debuff, Fiery Bolt, and then Killing Flames after that, and just kind of rinse and repeat. And make sure that you are marking your targets with your curse, so hitting right bumper. Right bumper helps you deal more damage. And as you can see, Pillar of Power is also dealing damage to them, putting up some pretty good ticks, and they're burning from the damage over time effect from Hellish Rebuke. You can see that little flame on the middle guy there. And now I'm going to show you the main boss fight power that I use. I switch off Fiery Bolt and put on Warlock's Bargain. Warlock's Bargain doesn't proc very well on dummies, just because of the fact that part of the damage that you get from it is when they deal damage to you, you reflect that damage back. So on a dummy, it's not that great to use on a dummy, but just to show you the basic rotation. So generally go mark your target, Pillar of Power, Warlock's Bargain, and then Killing Flames, and it will amplify the power of Killing Flames. And then you can even throw in your daily here, using the single point for Broods of Hadar, and with only 3 points in it, it still hits very hard. But that's pretty much the build. Those are the basic rotations that I use. I don't generally change very much off of those two rotations, just for boss fights, and then Fiery Bolt for the rest. But if you guys have any comments, questions, concerns, feel free to drop a comment below. And as usual, guys, thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Stay tuned for more content coming from me.